Well, with this December crop report now behind us, we just wanted to take a step back and kind of evaluate the three major row crops and where we might be a little more optimistic versus defensive. Keep in mind, everything we're discussing is for education and example purposes. Make sure you guys understand and know your own risk tolerance as we go through this information. Well, let's start with the corn market. And really, when we're ultimately cautiously optimistic here on corn, I think the bulls are going to continue to point to strong exports. You have a competitive price here on the global market for U.S. corn. When we jump down to the bear side of things, for us, we believe feed usage could probably be adjusted lower. And then at the end of the day, you still are staring at a 2 billion bushel ending stock number. Now, the things that kind of tip maybe still in the bulls' favor, those when you get to that wild card category. Okay, we believe that there's a good production here in the U.S., but perhaps yield could come down just slightly more. And the biggest thing too is that we're still in that South America production window. They're just kind of getting started on corn, and then when you look to Brazil's second crop, they're well off from even getting that planted. So there's still a little bit of potential weather threats there on corn that can offer some support and perhaps even push this market up a little bit. And with that, do the specs move from a neutral position into more of a net long? So that's where corn maybe 460, 480. Like we said, we're a little more cautiously optimistic here as we look out to the environment of corn over the next couple of months. Now, when we go to wheat, we're a little more neutral here. I think global supply always continues to keep pressure on prices. But on the other hand, the U.S. does have some higher quality wheat that's affordable that certainly could be an attractive point for the bulls. Ultimately, the wild card, I think, here continues to come down to that Black Sea conflict and whether or not it can interest the specs in moving into more of a long position. At the end of the day, the global supply line of wheat still seems to be relatively healthy. So we continue to be more neutral here on this wheat market. Now, when we go to the soybean side of things, this one we're obviously a lot more defensive on. I think near term, really, short term, the bulls still kind of have some staying power here. When we look at the technicals on these charts, we're coming back into that breakout area, and then you have gap fill. So some potential for bounces here, but whether it's sustainable or not, is probably unlikely. The wild card really is going to come down to China's demand. I think, you can make an argument that some of these unknown sales could potentially be allocated to China, but nonetheless, as a whole, the U.S. export program for beans is still struggling to stay pace to meet that USDA objective. Now, when we go to the bearish side of things, this is really where we're building our defensive case. The U.S. just brought in about 4.5 billion bushels of supply. South America's weather window has essentially closed. And they're going to be starting harvest here as soon as January. And through March, they could potentially bring in about 8.6 billion bushels of supply into this market. And then, the specs had built up a net long position, as we're learning on that recent rally. Well, with all of that bean supply coming to market, do you really think that the specs are going to continue to hold a net long? Or are they going to, move into more of a sell off and move into more of a neutral or short position? And that's where, again, we just continue to be a little bit more defensive on beans. It just seems like this argument really favors the bears at this time. So as we look to wrap things up, again, if we're looking for a market maybe to be a little more bullish on, we'd go to the corn side of things. And I think most of it's going to come down to that South America weather window as we move through the January crop report and then South America production. We do, we will want to revise this if we don't see those weather threats or a major drop in yield. All of a sudden, you might have to get a little bit more neutral or defensive on beans as well. But for now, we see that there's some potential upside. When we go to wheat, really neutral. Like we said, you just need a spark here, and it's probably going to have to come from outside the U.S. And then when we look at soybeans, the bears really seem to be in control. And, if the specs are liquidating on top of good supply coming online out of South America, for us, that it ultimately ends up being a really tough environment to be bullish on, in the mid to longer term. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help. As always, like the video. We appreciate you when you subscribe to the channel. We always enjoy making this content for you, and God bless.